Right now, Crimea is exploding with intensity. A real frenzy has begun on the peninsula. The occupiers are losing their minds from our strikes. An unexpected turn of events. Russia is urgently opening a new front. A strike from Transnistria. Things have started in Moldova. Putin is strangling the Baltics and reaching for the red button. Shock, Russia doesn't have much time left. Ukraine is becoming the arsenal of the world. The dictator's soldiers have started to suspect something is wrong. A mutiny is breaking out in the Russian army. All this and more in our episode Hell Point. Right now, Crimea is being completely disarmed. The defensive positions of the Russian army have been completely destroyed. The Ukrainian armed forces have launched a secret special operation that is methodically driving the occupiers out of the peninsula. The Kremlin has admitted that Crimea is literally hanging by a thread. Any moment now, our forces will make the final push and finally cut it off from Russia. An epic video. The FSB, the armed forces, and even possibly Putin himself have come under a barrage of Ukrainian fire. And on top of that, the Black Sea Fleet has collapsed. Stunning details of the truly shocking rout of the enemy. Don't miss what's next.
The Russians are having problems in Crimea, and the further it goes, the more surprises await the enemy.
Crimea is gradually, if we draw analogies, thanks to the Ukrainian defense forces, turning into something like a Kremobaivka. By analogy with Chornobaivka, yes, where the destruction of the Russian army, Russian occupiers, and accordingly their weapons and equipment happens constantly.
Ukrainian defenders have a clear understanding of where the Russian occupiers are located in occupied Crimea and are doing everything possible to drive them out.
There is active work going on in Crimea. The process of demilitarizing Crimea is ongoing. This is an integral part of the deoccupation process.
In temporarily occupied Crimea, there are increasing problems with fuel, water, and military equipment. Ukrainian strikes are destroying enemy bases, while the Russians are trying to conceal the scale of their losses. This refers to ground, air, and naval operations that our defenders are successfully carrying out. Hang in there. Guys, let's get out of here.
Today, the Russian military facilities in Crimea that came under attack, let me emphasize military facilities, are those that pose a threat both to the peninsula itself, because they are located there, and in fact, threaten other territories of our country. This equipment is currently being used to launch missile strikes against our territory. Accordingly, this is what enables the Russians to conduct extensive reconnaissance of our airspace.
Enemy air defense facilities are being regularly eliminated, along with the destruction of naval targets and strikes on ground targets, including railway infrastructure.
The air defense system in Crimea, which is currently operating very actively and trying to repel strikes by Ukrainian defense forces, is not succeeding very well. It is also being used as a weapon of killing.
Problems with supplies are growing on the peninsula, and the Russians' defensive positions are being destroyed.
Work is also underway on those key points that will open the door to Crimea for us, in particular the Kinburn Spit, the Dendrovka Spit, and in fact the territory of Crimea itself.
Almost every week, the destruction of Russian helicopters or air defense elements is recorded. This creates an atmosphere of fear among the occupiers and forces them to conserve resources. Ukrainian drones have even reached government Dakas. On the night of September 22nd, explosions were heard in the Foros area. Russian collaborators reported that drones struck the territory of the Foros sanatorium. It was reported that 3 people were killed and 16 were injured.
It is quite likely that this very guest house was the meeting place for high-ranking officials, possibly from the FSB or quite possibly the armed forces of the Russian Federation. Yes, we have not seen any objective verification from the so-called Russian side regarding the dead or wounded civilians. And this would have been the very first thing the Russian Federation would do if it had actually happened that way.
The Russians kept silent about the fact that there were very important guests at the sanatorium at the time of the attack. Exactly who they were has not been specified. A notice was posted on the sanatorium's social media page stating that on September 21st, the Foros Hall restaurant would be closed for special service. But all the Russian news outlets are showing the school next door instead.
The assembly hall of the school suffered the most damage. Here, part of the ceiling has collapsed. Just look at what's left of one of the walls. From the damage, you can see that the drone flew in through this window. Now there are fragments scattered everywhere here.
The Russians tried to use this school for propaganda purposes, even though it was closed on the weekend with no students or anyone else there, to cover up yet another of their terrorist attacks on our country. This is what the Russians always do. But again, it's not actually about hitting the school as a target, it's about the boarding house with the same name, Teletsky, which is located across from the school.
Nearby is the government Dacha 11 and the Zarya facility. There's a helicopter pad here, so the FSO is always present, and they can be brought in to provide security for meetings. And of course, there is air defense.
We are demonstrating that today the defense forces, using various means of firepower, can reach the occupiers anywhere in our Crimea, in any location, north, south, west, or east. And today, there is not a single facility in Crimea that cannot be struck by the defense forces. The Russian air defense system has once again unequivocally proven its significant and undeniable incompetence. They are incapable of protecting either Russia or the temporarily occupied territories. Air defense systems in Crimea are being destroyed, and this is the path to the demilitarization of Crimea and, most importantly, its deoccupation. We are on the right track.
The Russian aircraft fleet on the occupied peninsula has been reduced as a result of the successful combat operations of the Ukrainian Defense Intelligence Special Unit, GHOSTs. 3 enemy Mi-8 multi-purpose helicopters were hit, as well as the Russian Nebo-U radar station.
4 helicopters have been destroyed in just a few days, along with 2 unique amphibious aircraft, the U-12 Chaika. There are actually very few of them in the Black Sea Fleet. If I'm not mistaken, only 6, and 2 have already been destroyed.
The intelligence officers showed footage of the operation and a video of the wreckage of one of the destroyed Mi-8 helicopters. Occupied Crimea has become a symbol of the fuel collapse. A large amount of fuel was brought here to refuel Russian military equipment. As a result, there is now a shortage and record high prices on the peninsula. The rise in gasoline prices is linked to Ukraine's strikes on Russian oil refineries. The video shows Sevastopol. In Yalta, gasoline was delivered to one of the gas stations. The line of people wanting to refuel is enormous. Neither the Russian nor the occupation authorities of Crimea acknowledge the problem. They insist that the issue is only about logistics. Facts of human rights violations in Crimea are regularly documented and submitted to the UN Human Rights Council and the OSCE. The Russian occupation administration forcibly conscripts Crimeans into the ranks of the Russian armed forces, and refusal to serve is punishable by criminal prosecution. In addition, there is ongoing militarization of children. Crimea is waiting to return, and Ukraine is not allowing Russia to normalize the occupation. A new threat. The Russian Federation is preparing an offensive against Ukraine from Transnistria. The first steps have been taken. Moscow has dared to act recklessly. Kremlin agents are setting everything around ablaze with the fire of discord. The situation is more unstable than ever before. This is a springboard for realizing Putin's secret desire. A decisive week has begun. How will it end, and should Odessa be preparing for a Russian invasion right at this very moment? This and more in the following report.
Everything will be decided in the coming weekend. By disrupting the elections, Russia is trying to seize power in Moldova and overthrow the government, after which the country could be used as a springboard for an attack on Ukraine. President Maya Sandu addressed the nation with such a video message.
If Russia gains control over Moldova, the consequences will be immediate, and they threaten both our country and the entire region. Freedom of movement could come to an end, and our land could become a springboard for incursion into the Odessa region. The Transnistrian region will be destabilized.
Moreover, it is precisely Transnistria that poses a particular danger today, according to experts.
Let me remind you, Moldova shares 1,222 kilometers of border with Ukraine. Moldova is not a large country, but important infrastructure projects, so to speak, connect us with Ukraine, and that's why the stakes are high.
There, traditionally, the population holds the most pro-Russian sentiments, and it is clear that the Moldovan authorities have not done enough work with them over all these years.
Politicians have called on Maya Sandu to take control of Transnistria. This pro-Russian enclave is now a huge problem not only for her country, but for the entire European continent. Of course, it's not solely her responsibility, but the leading role in this matter truly belongs to her. If she had initiated the appropriate processes and changed the agenda regarding Transnistria, she would be facing far fewer threats today.
It was decided to fight only at the final stage. Less than a week before the parliamentary elections themselves, Moldova began identifying and detaining possible participants in the unrest that the Kremlin is already preparing for election day.
This is connected to the forceful protests being prepared after the elections. The criminal world still remains part of this overall post-Soviet system of thieves in law. And so with the help of these people in these structures, forceful protests were being prepared both inside the prisons and on the outside. And so just this morning, the police, together with the special services and the Information and Security Service, carried out an operation to prevent these actions.
Thus, during searches on September 22nd in Moldova, 74 people were detained who are suspected of undergoing training in Serbia to organize rallies and protests. In particular, they were trained abroad in handling firearms and special equipment. For this, participants received about 400 euros. Law enforcement officials claim that Russian special services are behind the operation, and the suspects are connected both to Moldovan political parties and to criminal groups. At the same time, the investigation itself has been ongoing since July of this year. But the use of force is only part of the Kremlin's tactics. After practicing in Romania, Moldova also decided to use mass interference in elections through social media.
That is, a deliberately insane number of short videos are being recorded for TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook. And all of this is distributed in both Romanian and Russian, but with Moldovan themes, to specifically attract our citizens' attention. And this is precisely what they are currently betting on for the future.
For those who are older and haven't mastered TikTok yet, there's a separate program. The same Russian Orthodox Church, which has assimilated in Moldova for religious purposes, nevertheless maintains its standard, complete subordination to Moscow.
Another very concrete pillar of their distinct identity, so to speak, is the deeply rooted Orthodox connection with Russia, because this is a Turkic Orthodox people who, according to historical accounts, were supposedly resettled here by the powerful Russian Federation. And so to this day, they express their gratitude in this way through their love for Russia and through Orthodoxy. In fact, Orthodoxy, modeled after the Russian type, serves as a point of connection and communication with Russia for them. And of course, Russia consistently uses this particular situation to significantly strengthen its political influence, as well as to substantially increase its economic and separatist influence over these specific regions.
At the same time, analysts remind us that Moldova's political system is organized in such a way that the parliament has significantly broader powers, including those related to the country's foreign policy direction. That is why parliamentary elections are perhaps even more important than the election of the country's leader.
It seems to me that, unfortunately, there is a lack of understanding if we talk about society as a whole in percentage terms. There is not enough understanding of the degree of threat, because people think, well, how many times has this already happened? My goodness, how many times has it been already? We had the pro-Russian Voronin in power, then he was replaced, then there was the pro-Russian Dodon, and again he was replaced. But all of that was before the illness of that very northern dictator reached such an extreme stage, when he started attacking neighboring countries and sending drones over the European Union. And I think that if this time we end up in his clutches again, it won't be as easy to get out as it was in the past.
Experts also believe that this week will remain tense right up until the elections, which will take place this weekend. At the same time, the authorities are urging people to stay alert around the clock, since this is essentially Russia's last chance to divert Moldova from European integration by relatively peaceful means.
The Kremlin lost the first phase of the hybrid war in the fall of 2024, when it tried to disrupt the referendum and the re-election of Maia Sandu, and now the struggle is unfolding for control over the parliament.
Every voice matters. Join our community, support independent journalism, and help us bring you the truth from Ukraine. Become a member of Ukraine today. Join us now.
Putin has opened a new front, but this time it's in Europe. He's bombarding the Baltics with drones, yet there is still no strong response from the United West. A sharp turn of events. A decisive step has finally been taken. NATO has finally gotten involved, preparing to shoot down Russian aircraft, while the US is leaving the Baltic countries to fend for themselves. Putin's provocations are unfolding with renewed force. The dictator has found weak spots and is determined to press on. Why hasn't Europe cut off all of the Kremlin's brazen plans yet? Don't miss what's coming up next.
The war in the Baltics is already underway. After 3 Russian fighter jets invaded and literally reached the Estonian capital, Article 4 of NATO was activated there.
We are convening consultations regarding Article 4. If you put together everything that has happened over the past couple of weeks, including the attack on Poland by 19 drones, this is already a systematic test of NATO. A 12-minute violation of Estonian airspace requires a decisive response, both politically and practically.
Yes, indeed, war with the Russian Federation is absolutely real, that's obvious. This is a demonstration to Europeans of their indecisiveness and the fact that NATO essentially is not standing up to the challenges.
Germany, Lithuania, and the Czech Republic have stated that in such provocations, aircraft should be shot down.
They are simply testing our resilience, our determination to defend ourselves. I think we must be extremely firm in that if there are violations of the rules, we must respond to them appropriately, including by military means, in this specific case, by shooting down aircraft. And only then will Russia very quickly realize that it made a mistake.
But for now, any real action against Russia is still a long way off. For example, US President Trump has been avoiding this topic for several days now.
I won't say anything about this yet, but I will be brief soon, and I'll let you know today or tomorrow. I don't like it when things like this happen. This could cause major problems.
Now, we are truly coming to understand the obvious and significant consequences of the United States' persistent reluctance, essentially, to fully and completely fulfill its own fundamental obligations in ensuring the comprehensive European security. This is because Europe, in its current geopolitical situation, genuinely has no other viable options or alternatives available to it. They have nowhere to buy weapons, their military-industrial complex isn't scaled up, and they don't have an army. Everyone is ready to trade elegantly, live in luxury. But to be honest, in Europe, they've forgotten how to defend their interests with weapons in hand.
Moreover, there have been reports in the press that the US may even want to abandon the defense of the Baltic countries altogether.
Because, well, just recently there was news that the US is refusing to provide air defense systems to the Baltic countries, and among other things, will most likely withdraw troops over time and is already reducing military aid. This is exactly the opposite of what European countries expect from the United States in the face of such acts of aggression from Russia.
Russia has been staging provocations in the Baltics for 4 years now. For example, it actively uses an illegal shadow fleet there to transport oil. Estonia detained one of these tankers that lacked proper documentation. However, after an inspection, the ship was later released.
We will all be monitoring and inspecting Russian fleet vessels if anything suspicious arises, and Russia is getting nervous about this. This is an illegal way for Russia to make money for the war in Ukraine and to conduct hybrid operations against European NATO countries.
Well, right now, and this is important, it's far from certain that Putin is actually planning a military operation against EU and NATO countries. In other words, simply put, Putin wants to get what he needs without war, just by escalating military threats around European countries and demonstrating their weakness and inability to even protect themselves in a basic way.
In addition, the Russians have repeatedly disabled communication cables between European countries in the Baltic Sea. Because of this, another tanker was detained off the coast of Finland. This time, the crew is facing criminal charges.
I believe the conclusion we can draw is that it's time to get used to a new reality. A lot of similar things could happen in the future. Of course, when this happened last year, the ship left the Baltic Sea, but this year we have already detained it.
Tolerating such egregious incidents, of course, is simply giving Vladimir Putin a free pass to persistently keep doing this and even further escalate the corresponding threats. In other words, Putin's impunity will only further motivate him to continue raising the level of escalation, both against Ukraine and against the European Union and NATO countries.
While NATO countries hesitate, it definitely frees Putin's hands and makes it clear to him. He can act with impunity, from minor provocations to a direct invasion of the Baltic states.
Shock! Ukraine is arming the world. Zelensky has announced a truly resounding start to the export of our weapons. Domestic weaponry is already in the global game. New combat innovations tested on the blazing front lines are at this very moment heading abroad. It's hard to believe. Ukrainian engineers have exceeded the plan. The start of a new era. Now everyone envies our technology. How this was achieved and what prospects for the development of the defense industry we still have, we'll tell you in the report in just a moment. Ukraine is officially launching the controlled export of its own weapons, but it's not doing this for the sake of trade. According to President Volodymyr Zelensky, this is a tool that will allow us to finance the growth of our own defense industry and strengthen the front.
Thanks to such controlled exports, we will increase the production of drones for the front, we will have funding, certain types of weapons, and these are modern weapons. We can produce in much larger volumes than we can finance ourselves. And certain types of weapons we already have in much greater quantities than we actually need in Ukraine today.
Why is this happening right now after 3.5 years of intense war? The Ukrainian military-industrial ecosystem has undergone intensive practical testing. Models that have been tested in real combat have proven their effectiveness.
The main focus is on unmanned systems, but not only that. We can see, for example, how production is now being scaled up. For instance, of the Ukrainian self-propelled howitzer Bodana and a number of other interesting models and units. And this actually clearly demonstrates that Ukrainian products are now truly of significant interest on the global arms market, attracting considerable attention.
Today, many enterprises are operating under conditions of chronic underfunding. They could produce much more, but there isn't enough money or orders. The underutilization of the Ukrainian defense industry is estimated at around $15 billion. There is a shortfall of about $6 billion just for drone production. Controlled exports will allow funds to be raised for the modernization and expansion of production lines, while still maintaining priority for the front.
If a unit of weapon costs $10 for Ukraine and is sold only on the Ukrainian market, the manufacturer is limited to just the Ukrainian market. But when it is sold abroad for, say, $15 to $20, taking into account profit and all additional expenses, that same unit of weapon could cost Ukraine $9 or even $8.
The economic effect is obvious. Manufacturers receive income, while the Ukrainian army gets modern weapons at a price lower than the cost of production. Moreover, if Ukrainian manufacturers are given access to the external market, the production volume of drones and other weapons could increase from the current $1.5 to $4 billion. These are not just numbers. This is a real chance to keep factories running, create thousands of jobs, and turn the defense industry into one of the drivers of the economy. But that's only one side of the coin. The strategic effect is also important. Purchasing countries, by building their logistics and service infrastructure around Ukrainian models, will in the future become dependent on components, repairs, and training, creating a long-term market and a political connection to Ukraine. Moreover, the expertise gained from battle-tested systems makes Ukrainian technologies recognizable on the world stage and attracts investment in research and development. But any initiatives carry risks. And that is precisely why Ukraine has chosen a model of controlled exports, which combines economic benefit with the guarantee that the front will remain fully supplied.
First of all, it's about selecting specific areas where we can sell, and only those things we currently have in abundance. For example, these are maritime drones, which are also attracting a great deal of interest worldwide right now. And of course, not just that, there are a number of other areas as well. But the point is that we will simply be earning money from this and accordingly receiving additional funding for our own defense forces.
Thus, controlled arms exports become both an economic and a strategic tool at the same time. It strengthens the Ukrainian defense industry, provides the front with the necessary resources, and opens up new opportunities for cooperation with allies. This is not just business. It is a way to turn our own developments and experience into an international resource that supports the country's defense and enhances Ukraine's strategic influence on the world stage.
Putin has lost his game. Russian troops are suffering catastrophic losses. Thousands are leaving the front every day, and there are almost no volunteers willing to join the so-called special military operation. The Kremlin's mobilization campaign has ended in failure, and veterans are preparing for open resistance. The entire front line is under threat, and it's unclear whom the dictator will be able to throw into the meat grinder of battle tomorrow. More details in the following report.
The Kremlin has finally begun to choke in the war in Ukraine. For the first time since the start of the full-scale invasion, losses in the Russian army have exceeded the number of people willing to sign contracts with the Ministry of Defense. The rate of recruiting contract soldiers is several times lower than the number of those killed at the front. The Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation assures that the situation across the border is turning extremely negative for Putin.
In the second quarter of 2025, only 37 and 9,000 people signed contracts with the Russian Ministry of Defense. This is the lowest figure in the past 2 years and 2.5 times less than in the same period last year. Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation.
Also, Russia no longer has enough contract soldiers to even cover its losses at the front. The Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation emphasizes that in recent months, the average number of deaths and injuries in the Russian army has exceeded 1,000 people per day. At the same time, according to the General Staff, Russia's losses in this war have already reached over 1,100,000 soldiers.
There are no longer always enough contract soldiers to cover the Russian army's weekly irrecoverable losses.
Andriy Kovalenko, head of the Ukrainian Center for Countering Disinformation. It seems there are fewer and fewer fools willing to join Putin's army. Even the most die-hard Z-patriots fully understand that this road is one way only. In most Russian cities, cemeteries are overflowing with fresh graves of occupiers who perished in Ukraine. There's nowhere left to bury the cargo 200. There is a catastrophic shortage of places for coffins returning from the front.
You see, here are the cemetery gates. They keep burying the guys outside the cemetery gates. They've started some kind of tree trimming here, and everything here is just as it was before. They keep burying people in this swamp, on filled dirt, and below, there's groundwater.
After seeing this, no one wants to sign a contract with the Russian Ministry of Defense. Even the huge sums of money by the standards of the Russian hinterland, millions of rubles for joining the occupier's army, no longer work. In the 4th year of the war, no one is rushing to line up at Russian military recruitment offices anymore. As a result, instead of the best, the Russian army is now taking the best of the worst.
Military recruitment officers have to meet their quotas. So if they don't see some medical documents or don't want to see them, they tend to, yes, they overstate the fitness category.
To make up for the shortage of cannon fodder at the front, they are sending droves of Russian drug addicts, people infected with HIV, tuberculosis patients, and all kinds of marginalized individuals to the front lines. Some citizens in Russia have built entire businesses around them.
40,000 rubles are now being paid for recruiting someone to the war in the Irkutsk region, according to the publication People of Baikal. As local women in the administration of Usolye-Sibirskoye said, you can get the money if you convince a citizen who is hesitant, if you help him make up his mind. It is not necessary to come to the military enlistment office with the volunteer, a local administration employee clarified. It is enough that, when signing the contract, the future soldier writes 2 statements and indicates who convinced him to come. Within 7 days, this social payment will be credited to his account, as it is for volunteers.
However, Russian recruiters complain that it's hard to persuade anyone to sign a contract and drag them into the military enlistment offices, especially when at the entrance you are met by dozens or even hundreds of already wounded soldiers begging the state for the assistance promised by Putin in case of injury.
They say on TV that they help the wounded, that they help with everything, but no one actually does it. You just go from one corridor to another, knocking on different doors, and it's all useless.
All this completely discourages Russians from going to the front. As a result, the military enlistment offices have to use force, intimidation, and threats against potential recruits.
Very often, unfortunately, we tend to use excessive force when conscripting young draftees into military service. I sincerely apologize for the unintentional tautology in my previous statement.
But even under the threat of prison or torture, which has recently become a common practice in Russian military enlistment offices, fewer and fewer people are being broken and forced to sign a contract with the army. Analysts say that soon the Putin army will simply choke. With each passing day, it is becoming increasingly difficult for the Kremlin to replenish losses at the front, as a result of which the enemy has practically left its flanks exposed in some areas. Experts assure that this is exactly what the Ukrainian armed forces may take advantage of in the near future. Meanwhile, the military has already announced a major counteroffensive by the armed forces of Ukraine.
That's all from me for now. This was me, Darina Hutkalo. Even more scorching news from the front in our next broadcast. And in the meantime, don't forget to subscribe and hit the like button. See you.